All right or all wrong? 100 or a 0?
Right, I'm making the long one.
All right, so the early part of chapter 21, we talked about why we need to trade, right? Please remember that the idea here is that trading allows us to exceed our production possibilities curve, right? We could potentially not trade with the rest of the world, but if that were the case, we would be stuck within our own production possibilities curve when it comes to standard of living. Since we trade, we are well outside of our range. All right. And that there is a balance of payments and a balance of trade, et cetera, right? So again, please keep the difference between balance of trade and balance of payment separate in your brain. All right, the last thing that we're going to cover in chapter 21 are exchange rates, or how does it work that the American dollar is sometimes worth 1.5 euros and sometimes it's only worth 1.25 euros. Why is it constantly changing? All right, and the reason why, which you should expect, since this is an econ class, is supply and demand, right? I mean, that's economics from day 1 to day, what is this, 32? So, blah, right? So the one thing that you should get out of this class is that the world is run through supply and demand, okay? Now, I would love it if you guys could graph it and tell me how it relates to prices and quantities, interest rates, and money supply, CPI, and GDP, that would be great. But as long as you started with supply and demand first, I would be happy, right? Because what most of us think, most normal people who have not taken an econ class think, is that the world is run by price and quantity, and that's not true, okay? It's run by supply and demand, and it's the supply and demand that change price and quantity. All right. So, when you are dealing with exchange rates, okay, the key here is realizing that on the horizontal axis must always be us, okay? So US dollars are always along the bottom, and along the vertical axis is the exchange rate with whatever currency else you're trying to figure out the exchange rate for, okay? So pick your favorite currency, all right? My favorite currency is the yen. And the reason why I like the yen is that you really have to be messed up to screw this spelling. 3 letters, and it's pretty straightforward, all right? The euro, it's only 4 letters, but then euro, is it EU, is it UE, is it,
EU.
Yeah, it's EU, but because, of course, all the Europeans call it an euro. Whatever. So the exchange rate is set up by demand and supply. Our good old fun buddies from way back when in chapter 3. All right? And the idea here is that this is our equilibrium, and I'll just abbreviate, exchange rate. So X dollars will buy us X yen, blah, all right? Now, as you suspected, or as you are probably guessing in your heads right now, it is when supply and or demand shift that the exchange rates change, which makes sense, all right? Now, the question is, what moves supply and what moves demand in the currency markets, all right? The supply will always be driven by us. We supply American dollars to the world, which hopefully makes sense to you, right? I mean, the only reason that there are dollars out in the world is because we are willing to take ours and go out and spend it somewhere else, all right? So we drive supply. So if we drive supply, guess who drives demand?
Everybody else.
Yeah, the foreigners, okay? And since we are working in yen, which foreigners do we care about right now?
Japanese.
The Chinese use the yuan, which is 4 letters, which is why we don't use it, too many letters. The Chinese is the yuan, the Japanese are the yen. So in this case, all we care about are the Japanese people, right? So in this case, for this particular example, we will only be talking Japanese when I talk foreign. You can change this to any currency you like, though, right? Then you just have to change the demand to that set of people, all right? All right, so what shifts? Let's be rebels this time, and let's start with supply instead of demand. Exactly. That it is titillating, I agree. It's a great word. You should learn to use that one more often. All right, so what shifts supply? Okay, so obviously it has to be something that's happening to American citizens, okay? So if nothing is happening to U.S. citizens, supply does not change. All right, so if I start my currency exchange, explanation off by saying the Japanese people and then blah, 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 blah. If I don't say anything about U.S. citizens, don't move supply, okay? So what shifts supply? Things, and I will go through some things, affecting U.S. citizens. So let's pick one. Let's start with a nice straightforward one, right? So let's say something like U.S. incomes rise and Japanese incomes stay the same. So nothing's happening to the Japanese, but something is happening to the Americans. Okay, so if nothing's happening to the Japanese, what happens to demand? Nothing, right? Since there's something happening to Americans, supply is going to move. Now, here's where you guys have to use your brains a little bit to figure out which way does supply move. When we have more money, are we going to supply more dollars to the rest of the world, or in this case to Japan? Yes, okay? Seems pretty straightforward, right? So our inclination is more U.S. income equals more supply of U.S. dollars. So if supply increases, now what are you guys going to do? You're going to shift supply. Kick butt, let's shift supply. Here's our new supply curve. What happened to our exchange rate? It went down. All right, so our American dollars will buy less currency. U.S. exchange rate falls, so we will buy less yen per dollar, and the American dollar weakens.
More money or a dollar weekend?
Yeah. Yep. Essentially, since there's more of them out there, it's not worth as much, therefore, it's not as scarce, right? So its value is slightly decreased, right? Because we've put more money out there, all right? Which is one of the, sort of semi-mini anomalies that's going on in the economy right now, is that U.S. incomes, have they been rising over the last 3 years? A teeny bit. What's happening to the U.S. dollar out there in the market? What should it be doing? It should be weakening a little bit, right? What's it been doing, though? Oh, yeah, we've been becoming stronger and stronger and stronger as an American dollar. So maybe there's something else going on that's making this happen. So what else might happen?
Demand rises at the same time.
Well, I mean, that could be the issue, but most other countries that are not seeing that big of a change in their their incomes either. So
That everyone else needs our dollar.
a little bit of stuff like that. But let's try something else. All right, let's go back to equilibrium. It's easier for me to go back to equilibrium than you guys. All right, so in this instance, okay, this one's a little bit on the tricky side. U.S. has inflation, Japan does not. So our inflation rate, again, let's assume our inflation rate is hovering somewhere around 1%, 2%, which is pretty much where it's at. And Japan's is stayed at pretty much 0%, which is completely wrong. Its inflation rates are actually pretty high. But let's assume that that's what's going on. Now, when the U.S. has inflation,
We spent less money. Or
will we supply more dollars to the rest of the world? Right?
Maybe.
Why would we?
Because we want them to pay the higher rate.
Well, if we have inflation, so the U.S. prices of goods are going up. Japanese goods, what are they doing? Staying the same. Who's cheaper?
we're buying stuff.
They are. So we're going to buy more stuff from Japan. So what are we going to do? We're going to give them more dollars, right? We are actually going to supply more dollars to Japan because we're going to want to buy their cheaper goods. Dang. All right. So supply of U.S. dollars rises due to cheaper goods, right? Now, what's happening in Japan? Again, think about this from the Japanese citizen's perspective.
They're reducing their debt.
They're making their money less valuable.
Remember what Japan's trying to do. They're trying to demand our dollars. Are they going to want U.S. dollars? Why not?
Because they're not worth it.
Because we have inflation. What's happening to the price of our goods? They're going up. Do the Japanese want those expensive goods? No.
They want their own goods.
They want their own goods because they're staying cheaper. So this is the one time in this class where one event will actually change both supply and demand. Right, you guys have been wanting to do that since day one.
We have.
And here it is. You'll finally get it here on day last where it does. It changes both of them at the same time. Right? So in this case, demand for U.S. dollars falls due to higher U.S. prices, right? So this one actually moves both supply and demand. So the supply of U.S. dollars increases. Here's our new supply curve. And what happened to demand? It fell. It shifts to the left, right? Here's our new demand curve. So when supply grew, what happened to the exchange rate? It went down. What happens when demand falls? It falls even further. This is what's known as the double whammy. This is the double whammy for exchange rates, right? When your country has inflation and the other country does not, it's going to hit you twofold on your exchange rate, right? I mean, it's all there is to it. Because your supply will grow as you buy more foreign goods, and your demand will fall as you export even less, all right? So this one, the exchange rate falls doubly so.
Is that effect instantaneous?
All of these are slightly lagging. I mean, it's not going to be an instantaneous shift.
You'll hit the first point and then the second point.
Usually that's the way it'll go, although these can, it'll probably be incremental of both. They'll shift together. So basically it'll shift a little bit this way and then back, and it may go this and that and this and that. And so it'll zigzag, but it'll be zigzagging down. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And this is part of why the U.S. currency has stayed relatively strong, is that we have experienced almost no inflation over the last 3 years. The rest of the world has still seen higher inflations than we have. All right? So the way it's going in the real world right now is actually the opposite of this picture that I drew. Our inflation rates are pretty low. The rest of the world's are all higher than us. Yeah, it's a double whammy on them. Ours is actually going up. That's partially why, even though our incomes are not really rising, or the little bit of rising we've seen, which should make our dollar weaker, it hasn't been, because our inflation rates have been controlling everything. Right? And that's actually, again, sort of a good thing. All right? Again, realize what's going on. When our U.S. dollar is stronger, when the U.S. dollar is strong, we as a country will not export very many goods. Right? When the U.S. dollar is strong, that means it costs a lot to buy a dollar. Will they want to buy our goods when our dollar is strong? Nah. And what smaller foreign currencies over the last 30 or 40 years have done to recover from recessions has often been to deflate their currency. Right? So Greece and Italy and France, whenever they had bad recessions in their economy, all their central bank would do is pump out money and make their inflation rates go way up and have pretty high inflation and pretty high interest rates, and just say, oh, look, yep, sure we had a recession, but if we pump money, eventually aggregate demand will grow and our debts will be less, and they will essentially deflate themselves out of a recession. The reason they haven't done that now, they're all tied in the euro, right? It used to be Greek could go, devalue the drachma, devalue the lira. The French could, I don't even remember what the French currency, the franc. All right. So they could devalue the franc, and that's how they would get out of their problems, small problems. Unfortunately, with one solid currency, mostly run by the Germans. Do the Germans want inflation?
Yeah.
Oh, no, they don't. And so Angela Merkel stands up and says, no, 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 right? Because she basically controls the International Monetary Fund right now. So this is what's going on with supply and demand, right? Again, please realize supply is driven by us, demand, them, all right? All right, so yeah, mm-hmm. Well, if we were Japanese, we would put the yen down here and the dollar up there. Since in theory we tend to be America-centric,
No.
we put ourselves down here. All right, so tell me what happens to the exchange rate under these circumstances. So the U.S. Advertises to Japan that Hawaii is a great vacation spot. What do you mean? You can actually find on Japanese TV, there will be commercials on Japanese TV from the U.S. government advertising to them that Hawaii is a good vacation destination for the Japanese market. And
I wonder if they have Japanese guilt from that.
maybe a little bit, but do realize, they bombed us first.
Right.
But the idea, though, is that the other thing about Japan, if you haven't heard anything about their economy and their lifestyle, right? They live on an island. You guys all know Japan's an island, right? It's kind of a small island given the population. Actually, in Japan, every citizen must take and spend at least 4 weeks off the island every year, by law. Yeah. It's part of their package. It's part of their citizenship package, right? So they quote unquote agree to it. They get to travel, right? By law.
Mandatory travel.
I mean, you can pay. There's some buyout you can pay if you don't take the 4-week travel off island, but it's a severe tax. All right, it's almost cheaper to fly to Hawaii. Right. So, again, this is. I mean, how many of you have flown to Hawaii in the last 10 years? If you've ever gone to Hawaii, guess what a lot of the signs are written in? Japanese. Why? Because we've been advertising in Japan for the last 20 years. Because we know, right? They've got a policy that says you got to leave the island. So, yeah. All right. So the question is,
Another island?
huh?
So they go to another island?
Yeah, essentially. So what do you think is going to happen to the exchange rates because of this? I think- So,
In like 200 years, Hawaii will be on the coast of Japan.
What?
Because Hawaii
Did you know
is
that Hawaii
constantly
moves?
moving.
well, true, Hawaii does move.
Island, it moves. So like 300-400 years from now, Hawaii.
Well, 3,000 or 4,000, probably more like. That would be cool. See, so it's getting closer all the time. It's going to get cheaper. That's what the. All right, so. So what's going to shift in this example? Supply or demand? Which one's going to shift? Supply. Why is it supply? Because we are trying to tell the Japanese, hey, come to the U.S., right? What is all advertising trying to do? Whenever you're trying to muck with advertising, you're always mucking with demand, okay? That's the rule of advertising, right? Is that we're trying to force demand, and not only are we trying to force demand up, but we're trying to force it up a significant amount, right? So, right, so we expect demand for U.S. dollars to increase, right? Because those Japanese, in order to fly to Hawaii, they're going to need dollars, right? So they're going to have to go out and buy them. All right, what happens when demand increases? The exchange rate rises. The exchange rate will increase, and the dollar gets stronger.
Doesn't then their money, because the,
Want to know what's happening to their money? It's getting weaker.
oh, so it's the opposite way, then you'd start with a large number on the bottom and the small number on the top? Oh, okay. I'm gonna put that right.
So it's all how you move from this equilibrium exchange rate, right? If you move up in this, there's more dollars per, there's less yen per dollar, or more dollar per yen, however you want to look at that, so that you will be able to buy more yen with your U.S. dollar. All right, so let's see. Let's try one more, and then we'll call it a day, because this is the last thing. Got to end it on supply and demand curves. That's good stuff. All right, so So what happens when Japanese incomes are rising?
Demand change.
Oh, sorry, falling. The other rising, which is falling. So Japanese incomes are falling while U.S. incomes basically stay the same. Exactly. So in this case, the Japanese have less money. So since they have less money, they're going to demand less American goods. So this time we actually expect demand to decrease. So what happens when demand decreases? The exchange rate falls. That's right. So demand falls. And here, the exchange rate will fall. And the U.S. dollar weakens. And again, this is probably the real reason why our dollar has stayed strong over time, is that the demand for U.S. dollars has continually been high, period. I mean, mostly because any international trade that happens tends to happen in U.S. dollars as a means to transport. So when China tries to buy stuff from Europe, they don't actually go through euros to do it. The Chinese will switch to dollars, the Europeans will switch to dollars, and then they will trade dollars back and forth.
It's because our faith system is very strong in our magic money.
How do they determine how much a piece of yen is worth in US dollars?
Exchange rate.
It's this exchange rate right here.
How do they determine the exchange rate?
It's how many
Like,
out.
if I give you $20, how many yen can you give me?
Well, I would go find the exchange rate and figure out what it is. But the idea is that out in the international market, all the banks who are constantly trading dollars and yen and euros and yuan and whatnot back and forth, there is a constant supply and demand of them going on out in the world. So a bank that has, that for whatever reason a customer came in with $1 million yuan and said, I need to buy $1 million yuan's worth of dollars. That bank now has $1 million yuans. If that's a U.S. bank with $1 million yuans, can it use it to loan things out? No. So they have to somehow exchange it with somebody other bank out there back into dollars. Potentially a Chinese bank, potentially a European bank if they need to have yuan, or a Brazilian bank if they need it. But again, it's international, right? So there's a big, huge market that says who wants to trade, X number of dollars for X number of euros or yen or yuan or reais or whatever.
And is there a committee specifically that names that exchange rate?
International Monetary Fund. They're the ones who generally are going to report what's the exchange rate going at currently.
Do they report to our Fed?
Not officially, no. But they send report to the central banks throughout the different countries in the world that have them. Again, there was a bit of a to-do about this not being this being an issue. The International Monetary Fund not reporting properly to countries. If you're interested, you can read about some of the reporting issues of the International Monetary Fund. Now, if you would like to do some homework, you can. You do not have to. Sure, of course.
Nope, just do it for fun.
Hey, he might do it. Double the points, right?
So numbers 2 and 10 in chapter 21.
It was chapter 20.
4, 5, 9, and 10.
4, 5, 9,
Yeah.
Did you find your mug?
Aww.
It grew legs and walked off.
It is completely gone.
Somebody finally decided it wasn't Christmas anymore. Took it from me.
I know, that made me sad.
Well, did it have a happy snowman on it too?
Yes, it did.
Maybe they thought it was money because it
It could be currency. That's very true. In some country, that might be considered currency.
They just snagged you for 30 mugs.
No, see, you should have given me extra point because it was my birthday.
Some micronation in the US.
And I actually told you.
True.